Welcome to Conversations with Creative Minds. We have been searching for the meaning of creativity and the role it plays in our daily life. People use creativity to express themselves in different ways, such as writing, painting, poetry, composing music, or innovating new products. Creative minds have never been more relevant than today because of the need to solve our society's dynamic and complex problems. Here with us today is Goshgarian, award-winning author of 8 critically acclaimed thrillers such as Flashback and Tunnel Vision. Gary is a professor of English at Northeastern University, teaching courses in science and horror fiction. Gary has taught fiction writing workshops throughout the United States, as well as in England and Europe. In addition to his novels, he has also authored 5 popular college textbooks. He is the first physicist to become an English professor at the university. He writes under the pen name Gary Braver. He is known for his creative and innovative writing style. His novels have been translated into 7 languages, and 3 of them have been optioned for movies. Gary's latest work is a collaboration with best-selling author Tess Gerritsen of a mystery novel entitled Choose Me, to be released on July 1st, 2021. Today we are going to discuss Gary's books and the creative process of writing. Gary, thank you for joining us today.
I was brought up very near a movie theater in Hartford, Connecticut. And every Saturday, for 25 cents or half a dollar, friends and I would go watch 2 awful movies together. Some of them were quite good, but in many ways, and again, this is going back to the question of visualization. In many ways, a deeper structure in my mind, or on some level of a deeper structure in my mind, I ingested the structure of a story. You get a sense of a beginning, middle, and end, and a real kicker at the end, surprises. And I think that is why my stories, in many ways, are very visual, because I see a video on my skull of the scenes I'm trying to create. And I think much of that has to do with the visual imprinting of movies I watched as a kid. I like I said, never ever regretted having a science background, but it made me love scientific discovery. I was born to space age, beginning to space age, and science of going to other worlds, it still fascinates me. I still read up this whole Martian landing by Perseverance. I looked at every photograph. I love it. I think that what the innovative nature of science helped in the innovative nature of teaching science fiction. Back in 1972, 71 or 72, I proposed a course in science fiction to the chagrin and I suppose mockery of some of my colleagues who had looked upon science fiction as kiddie literature, or maybe kiddie litter. And I said, no. I said, there is some great stuff here. And I started searching for authors and titles that would be revered by the canon, by the traditional English readings. And of course, I started with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and went right to contemporary writers. But what made it creative is my philosophy that education you should learn and should be entertained. And introducing a course in science fiction, which never been seen before, it was a challenge to make it both entertaining and educational. And I was up against 3 kinds of students: the absolute non-initiate, someone who's never read science fiction before, and the second class of people who had read some science fiction before. And then there were the aficionados, the sci-fi junkies, who were looking at me hoping that I would not turn their beloved genre into ink. And so it was trying to maintain a balance. and trying to make it fun, but also adopting titles that were smart, that were well written. And luckily, many of the science fiction writers that were just emerging and just getting published had backgrounds in literature. They read, Virginia Woolf and Thomas Wolfe and Faulkner. And so they knew how to write. And having to find these writers and find anthologies and novels that were still being published was part of the early days challenge. And then money speaks. Hollywood spoke and started making these massive, huge blockbuster Star Wars kinds of movies. And then out of the woodwork came all these very talented people who might have had degrees in English, and they started contributing their stuff to the literary landscape, and it was really good. They knew how to write. And so I introduced the course at the right time, and it became kind of a Frankenstein monster because we had 500 or 600 kids taking it at one time, and it had to be in an auditorium. And it was kind of killing the course because it became too impersonal. I just said, we're putting a cap on this. And I just want to fill a room. You can have a room with 100 people in it. We can still do it. But we're going to get out of the auditorium because I was not connecting to my students that way. But nonetheless, it was popular because it was kind of new. And it was, they were reading this stuff for the first time. And it was not the creature feature stuff that they were seeing at late night TV. It was good reading stuff. Yeah. It was probably in my sophomore year in college in physics. And I was doing a lot of writing. I was the copy editor for the newspaper. I did all the writing for the yearbooks. And I started a humor magazine. And I exhausted all the English courses at Worcester Polytech. And I was taking courses at Harvard and at Clark University because I just could not get enough literature courses because I knew by my sophomore year that I would be more creative in writing and in teaching literature than I would be in a physics lab. However, at Worcester Tech, you had an option of taking a lot of extra courses or having a thesis. And in my sophomore year, I got a summer job at Raytheon, which was in Maynard, Mass, and off of Route 20. And the physicist there said, we would like to build a model of a tornado because they are the scourge of Tornado Alley, and they're sucking up, cows and sheep and homes and trailer parks. And the destruction was, incalculable, and it's been going on forever. And so if we can make a model of a tornado in the laboratory, maybe we can, on a larger scale, seed the clouds, do whatever is necessary to stop them in nature. So I spent the summer at the lab in Maynard, Mass, and the next 2 summers there, in a year that I graduated and beyond, before I went to graduate school in English, the decision to transition was I didn't want to be a physicist. And I didn't know if I was as creative a mind to be a physicist and go off and get a PhD in it. And I didn't want to be stuck in a lab. I wanted to write. I was doing a lot of writing while I was in the graduate school. And then at Raytheon, while I was making a model of a tornado, I was also doing some science writing because physicists, were horrible with the language. And they're brilliant, but they couldn't make it sound understandable to the average person, even with a scientific background. So I was translating physics gobbledygook into plain English while I was working on this model of a tornado, and that became creative. We got this nice funnel cloud of smoke, and then the guy who had hired me, the physicist who hired me, having made a model of a tornado 6 or 7 feet high, he called in members of the Pentagon to photograph the tornado I made in the lab. And I had secret clearance, not top secret clearance. And those who had top secret clearance were thinking of tornado as a weapon. And I said, "This is not." I thought we were going to save the farmers in Kansas and the people in trailer parks. And he said, "Screw them." He said, "There's a war going on. There's a Vietnam War, and so they want to make the model of a tornado." In the same lab, it was like a James Bond set. In the same lab, there were only 6 of us in this lab, and the other people were working on laser guns, ball lightning, and a few other exotic weapons in this developmental stage, and the tornado was part of that. And I was getting excited by the kind of James Bond nature of this. But then I graduated from Worcester Tech, and I had already gotten into University of Connecticut at my master's, and I was going to go beyond. And never for a minute had I regretted the background. And the little creativity I did in doing this little project with the tornado was fascinating and fun, but I did not see this as long range, and I didn't want to make weapons. Also, I was kind of against the war and all that. So it was not just a personal decision, but it was kind of a semi-political decision too. But I had already started the application process, and I could not miss a beat because I had to transition right from my Bachelor in Science degree to a master's degree without getting drafted and being sent to Da Nang. And I'm the only child of a divorced woman, and she had heart issues, and I just didn't want to end up in Vietnam. That would have killed her. So I did make the transition right to graduate school. And I knew by the time I graduated that the only way to become a professional writer, was to teach. And I cannot tell you how, if you ever want to learn how to write fiction, teach it. Because you get to, like I said, art is imitation. You get to see how other writers get into a scene, how in just a few inches they create a character, how the dialogue, which is not like real talk, but sounds like real talk, creates personality differences by the vocabulary. And I said, I want to do this. And it just means I have to come up with my own voice, my own style. But I became psyche sensitive to the need for action and how other writers did it. The need for good vocabulary, good writing, cliffhanger endings to scenes, and how to get in and out of a scene, and the economy of creating characters, and all that you get from having taught. And I just, came up with my own ideas, and eventually started writing books. Yeah. I think it bothered me that the tornado was going to be, thinking about making a weapon out of it. I just found that incomprehensible, and it was shocking to me because I didn't know that when I got hired, and I was told this was going to be for good purposes. I mean, the people from the Pentagon thought a weapon, a Vietnam weapon was good purpose. I just didn't happen to agree at that time. But it was more personal. I didn't want to do theoretical physics. I don't know if I had the personality or that particular left brain intelligence to do it, to be creative and have it satisfy me, the life I wanted to lead. I like to teach, and I wanted to go to teach in college. And I knew that college could afford the time to write as well as the inspiration. And so that is what that was the prime motivating factors. I mean, the 20% maybe with the political stuff and the ethics, but it was the Vietnam War. So it was not a matter of I was totally anti-war. I just didn't want to see my project shockingly turn into something bigger. They never did. It could not have been done. The physics was not there for it. But the idea was there. And it was a creative idea, interesting idea. I suppose by history and by example, the question: if you invent something, should we have invented it? I mean, I don't know. I mean, if there's nothing parallel to from history to what this new innovation is, then it makes it very difficult to determine if this is going to have bad consequences. But there's always the other stuff too, the creative mind in science. Thank goodness for it. I mean, these vaccines in this pandemic, that's just a brilliant way of turning this scourge around. No one saw COVID-19 until we had it, and then those creative minds did something about it. So it's not all black and white. And thank goodness they were there to come up with these vaccines. And yet, I mean, it was unpredictable. So it's not always something negative. It's not always, immoral or unethical. That creative spark. I suppose, again, by analogy. I mean, one of the fears that space travel scientists have going to another world is, will there be some biological thing up there that could infect us and can bring back to Earth? This is science fiction. This has been done hundreds of times. Or can we bring our germs up there and destroy a planet? And so, in many, Percy Bysshe Shelley said, poets are the legislators of mankind. They are the ones who provide the morality and ethics for the rest of us to ponder over. Arthur C. Clarke, whose short story gave us 2001, he wrote a story called Before Eden. And we have astronauts going up there, and they land on Venus, which is Edenic. Under that cloud around Venus, it's an Edenic world. And we bring our food up there, our food stuff, and they're smoking cigarettes and drop the butts on the ground. And over the course of the next 100 years, after we've come back to Earth, the entire planet dies. So they've destroyed Eden because of our germs up there. Now, it's a little bitty science fiction story, but the point was, we can corrupt an otherwise ideal, perfect world. So the notion that we could bring stuff to poison or bring stuff home from there to poison ourselves is already in the minds of people in the space and in NASA who've read these science fiction stories. I mean, they know the ethics are right there. They know the warnings are right there, the consequences of doing something blindly. So I think, to answer your question, going into the unknown, look to the literature. It goes back to Frankenstein, making something without even investigating the ethical consequence of it. And he was right that, there were these young writers coming along, and they were sensitive to inventions, innovations that were maybe not beneficial to mankind, humankind in the long run. I keep on mentioning Frankenstein because Mary Shelley, who was 19 years old when she wrote that, really introduced the concept of science without ethics, science without foresight. Okay, because you can make an artificial human being by sewing together body parts, doesn't mean you should. And what happens in that story is technology, the monster gets out of control and kills all the good things in Victor Frankenstein's life. And then he dies of misery. And that became, in many ways, the kind of ethical, it became the kind of moral compass that is still spinning today. It is still alive today. And we see this in, automation, displacing people by machines, because machines are much more efficient, and leaving people destitute without jobs. I mean, and then the dependency on technology, and getting into the wrong hands. I mean, the words of Robert Oppenheimer, one of the makers of the atomic bomb, Trinity, in 1945, his words were, "I have become death. I have become death." I mean, having split the atom and releasing the genie of the nuclear age, forever, we're under that mushroom cloud of fear that someone's going to start it again and do more Hiroshimas and Nagasaki. So that is what Eisenhower was talking about. He's fearing the government use or military use of technology without really thinking, do we really want to do this? And I saw what needs were impulses in society were, and that's what I extrapolated from. Elixir, which is about the discovery of a rare orchid in New Guinea, the business compound of which will prolong life. That's a hankering of all humankind. Let's live longer. In Gray Matter, the next book, I was very much aware of parents trying to take a shortcut in making their children smarter, and there was a whole industry of from the entertainment industry of recordings of classical music that would attach to a pregnant woman's belly and sending Bach through the walls of the stomach into the embryo, and that these children would come out in musical geniuses. I mean, there's all sorts of these crazy things going on, and then all the technology of 0 to 3, baby Einstein, baby Shakespeare, baby baby Plato. All these little DVDs and CDs and computer games that children were to play to boost their IQs. I saw this as a hankering of parents, and I was a parent of young children back then too. We want to make our kids, give the kids an intellectual advantage and boost their IQs, and that was what Gray Matter was all about. So the needs I saw were those that I exploited. Celebrity worship in Skin Deep, having the face of a famous person, having a face you weren't born with, and we have a pathological cosmetic surgeon who's making faces, and then tunnel vision, which was we are all hankering for life beyond, going into the laboratory and seeing if science can demonstrate if there is an afterlife. So all of the various hankerings and desires that are part of humankind, I just saw those as good MacGuffins to write novels on. I don't know if anyone read my books and tried to do any of this stuff. It was, like I said, the other way around. I saw what was out there, actually, let me tell you about one thing. I mentioned Gray Matter. I got that idea from CNN. Used to have little factoids that came down, and the majority of these soybeans in America are grown in Arkansas, or 95% of the people born in Japan have black hair, and 38% of all Greek males smoke. One of them was if there was one thing that you could change about yourself, what would it be? And the majority of the people said they wanted to be smarter. And that was what gave me the idea for Gray Matter. If you can boost the intelligence of people, that would be a popular notion. That would be maybe even a popular book. And that was what I came up with that. I don't think anyone is harvesting the brains of children and boosting them, artificially. It begins with research. I first go to the known experts and said, "Can I do this?" You held up Skin Deep just now, and I needed to talk to cosmetic surgeons before I wrote the book. I had to know the process of what I was hoping to do in the book, and I finally landed. Trying to find a cosmetic surgeon is going to give you half an hour of coffee time when they're making $400 a minute. It's very expensive coffee. But I did have my primary doctor said, "I got just a guy for you." He was the head of cosmetic surgery at Harvard, and he just retired. He's a widower and he's lonely, and I descended on him like a vulture on a zebra carcass. and he gave me 22 hours of information that was absolutely invaluable. I needed to not only be walked through a nose job, I wanted to do a facelift. I wanted to know how a facelift was done, but I also wanted to go beyond that. And he was the mentor to the French cosmetic surgeons who did the first face transplant of a woman who was bitten by a dog. You probably remember 15 so years ago. And there have been 1 or 2 successful transplants since then. But he, via the internet, pre-Zoom, mentored these doctors through the face transplant from one person to another, a cadaver to this live woman. So he knew what he was talking about, and that is exactly what I wanted. I wanted the surgeon in my novel to do face transplants, and not just a basic face job, a face transplant, to make the gorgeous woman, and therefore Skin Deep is the title. And that is where I started. And once I knew I could do that, and I could do a pseudo-scientific explanation for how it happened with really a lot of very legitimate details, I had the storyline. I had the basic MacGuffin in that story, the core that I could work with and build my characters around. And that's what I always do. I start off with the can I do this in a pseudo-scientific way to make it sound credible? And that's also true of police procedural stuff too. In that same book, Skin Deep, the main character is a Boston homicide detective, and his wife is going to get a nip and a tuck, and then she'll be recruited to do the face job, against her will, of course. And so I needed to know police procedural stuff, and I didn't want to base my information on TV cop shows. And I spent many hours with the tape recorder talking to cops, and they give me invaluable information. Yeah. Science fiction is centers on something that's not been done before, or not an invention that we've never had, an innovation that we've never seen before. It's that whole what if, and it's always in the future, either immediate or distant. Horror fiction is different. Science fiction gets its power from the future. Horror fiction gets its power from the past. And horror fiction is oftentimes an encounter with the supernatural. Demons, vampires, zombies, that kind of thing. And usually there is a Faustian bargain theme in it that, someone is tampering with dark stuff. They get a chance to engage in supernatural powers. The mystery is essentially the engine that drives a mystery is solving a puzzle. Someone leaves body of Charlie Brown in the opening chapter, and the investigator, a cop, CIA, FBI, whatever, investigative reporter, puts together clues and then deducts who the villain is at the end and nabs the bad guy. A thriller, you didn't ask this, but I'm going to throw this in, differs from a mystery because a mystery is driven by puzzle solving. A thriller is driven by dread. You may know what the bad stuff is going to happen. You may know when the bomb is going to go off, maybe know where it's going to go off. What drives a thriller is trying to prevent the mayhem from happening. Sometimes a thriller and a mystery overlap. All of my books, including Choose Me, is a thriller wrapped around a whodunit. The core of Choose Me, there is who killed her. The dread sets in, and this is another thing that Tess and I had to work out. We got to 2/3 in the book, and there was no threat to the protagonist. So we had to introduce a character who would impose a threat to the innocent protagonist, or not so innocent protagonist. So those are the distinctions. Horror fiction is really a very conservative genre. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. If the laws of the light world, jurisprudence, justice don't work, then the supernatural laws will get you. And that is the one of the core attractions I found in Stephen King's novels, is that he has a Faustian bargain deal in many of them, making a deal with the devil, doing something you shouldn't. I mean, one of my favorites and one I use in my course is Pet Cemetery, where a medical guy, a doctor, discovers a bad place, that you bury a cat here in this Micmac burial ground, it's going to come back to life. We're in the pandemic now, so there's a lot of television series that people watch, and just look at the fabulous settings of many of these shows, and they really do help create the atmosphere. The details of the setting create the atmosphere of the story, and that is particularly true in horror fiction, where the setting is not just staging, but a reflection of the moral and mental state of the characters. I mean, Edgar Allan Poe, one of his famous stories, The Cask of Amontillado, you have the main character, Montresor, who lures the character Fortunato into his crypt. And you go down, and Poe is very specific. You've got cold, dark, stone, wet. You got niter, that nitrogen-based stuff that like almost well, it's not quite fungus, but it's an inorganic material inside of caves. And you're down there with bones in his crypt, and you're going down, 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 which is the architecture of horror fiction. Things are always falling apart. And each one, and that decline, that going down, that descent, is both a mental descent of Montresor, who is insane, and a moral descent as we get closer and closer to walling up poor Fortunato. And you're surrounded by the details of the grave, and that characterizes the setting. It reflects the setting, at the same time, the kind of moral and mental decay and makeup of the main character. I think we're probably living in the most visual age the human race has ever experienced, with movies, television, particularly during the pandemic, and all the digital stuff that comes over, the visual stuff that comes over the what we're doing right now, the internet. I was brought up on movies, and I am one who needs to know the setting of a place. I like the writing, the style of writing, where I can visualize what is going on, visualize where we are. And to me, a setting is a character in itself in a piece of fiction, in a piece of good fiction. And I am very aware that when I'm writing my scene, I want my readers to know what the place looks like, what the characters look like, that satisfy that visual hankering. And also, setting the visuals are ways of characterizing a character, of fleshing the character out. If your character lives in an ornate room with art on the walls, with glass objet d'art, plants, and you got a cat, and you got an oriental rug, and this and that, great furniture, that tells you something about the character's connection to the culture at large. Versus a character who lives in a bare white-walled apartment. There is nothing on the wall. There are no pictures of family. There's no artwork. There are no posters, no movie pictures, movie stars, whatever. Nothing of color. That tells you that we got a stripped down monkish character here who does not have a connection to the art, natural or human world out there. So you can have, the setting, the visuals are ways that writers help create characters. Does your character have live flowers in that vase on the coffee table, or dried flowers or plastic flowers? Each of those options tells you something about the character whose room that is. How they dress, what they wear, what they look like, their deportment. This is how you also characterize the people in your book. And so, yes, I think visualization is very important in writing. And that is what has, attracted me to the various writers whose material I use in my courses. It's a boon to any writer who wants shortcuts to characterization. There are no original stories, very few original stories left. So what makes for creativity is the execution, the actual writing of it. Taking a detective archetype and giving that person interesting baggage or interesting personalities or different twists on what is standard. And that is what Tess Garrison and I did in this book. And Choose Me. Choose Me. Shameless self-promotion. This is the advanced reading copy. We had met at a Christmas party. I've known her for 25 years. And about 3 Christmases ago, she came up to me and said, "Would you like to write a book together?" And I said, "Give me a nanosecond to think this over." And I said, "Absolutely." And it was right at the height of the Me Too movement. And Harvey Weinstein and others were being pulled in for sexual harassment, and Matt Lauer from NBC, and we recognized there's a whole spectrum of charges against males who had levied sexual harassment against them, everything from rape to winking at a woman or making a sexual joke. So we wanted to explore this. And it had not been done before, even though detective stories, there are millions of those. So we decided to make a police procedural whodunit thriller. We decided we're going to have alternate chapters. Tess was going to write the female chapters, and I was going to write the male chapters. And it centers on an illicit affair between a college professor and a student. And we each wrote the opposing points of view because there are 2 sides to a story. I wrote the professor's point of view, and she wrote the student's point of view, and as well as the female detective. Where the creativity came in, it was in how we put this together. The dimensions we gave, psychological profiles we gave to the characters, what were the motivations of each, the neediness on the part of the female, the neediness on the part of the male professor. And we just kicked these ideas around and went back and forth via emails and telephone calls. Let's do this, let's do that. Sent each other chapters and scenes, and each of us made changes, editorial changes, suggestions to the other. And when we were each satisfied, we moved the story along. But it was a constant creating of something from nothing in going beyond what we knew of the genre. So it was, going beyond the familiar. And I think we kind of accomplished that in this. But I don't know if it's probably a long-winded way of talking about the creative process, but in arts and science, it is taking what is known and giving the world something better, or something the world never knew it needed. There is a town called Center Level, Maine, which is a little bit smaller than the desk I'm sitting at. If you have a very long car, you're in 3 towns. And it's called Center Level. It's about 2.5 hours from here, going inland from the coast of Maine. And we had friends who lived nearby. And as we were going through Center Level, there was it's a picture postcard, kind of a Norman Rockwell setting. There's a little white church, and there's a post office and general store. And there was a big sign that said, "Our own Stephen King will be reading to us tonight from his new novel." I think it was The Dead Zone. And everyone invited. So we went. And there was a little white church with maybe 50 people in it. And it was presented by the Center Level Ladies Owl Club. To be a Center Lovers Little Owl, you have to have read 100 books. It was probably just as many as they had in the library. And there was King. He came in, and he had just gotten back from Europe, where they were filming. Stanley Kubrick was filming The Shining, and he had a new book that was out. So after, there was a question and answer period, and we asked halfway intelligent questions, and he said, "Let's get together." And so I wrote to him, and I wrote to him. And he invited us to his house, my wife and me, and this other couple who lived in Central Lovell, Maine. And we went to his house, and it was the 4th of July, and he had lobster tails and fabulous spreads and stuff. And we talked, and I said, "Forgive me, but would you be willing to take a look at the manuscript of my next novel, or the advanced reading copy that I have here, of Atlantis Fire, and just give it an eye for a plug?" And he did, and he gave me a fabulous endorsement on that first novel. And then I got back to him and said, "I've been teaching science fiction for 10, 12 years. If I introduced a course in horror fiction, would you be my guest?" He said, "Sure." So I did, and that was like 1981 or 82. And he came to the class, and there were about 75 kids in the class at that point. It was at the first or second semester we had run the course. And I did not tell them that he was coming, because there would have been 3,000 people who would have shown up. So we were reading The Shining, I think, for that course, or maybe, Shining. And someone asked a question, "Well, why do you think King did this?" And I said, "Why don't we answer that question next class?" And then the next class, all the kids were in there, and in comes Stephen King, which was, some of them had marked the calendar from that date. And he was fabulous. And we became close over the years. And then I started a fiction writing workshop in London, sponsored by Northeastern. And he was the first guest I invited. And my close friend, Robert Parker, who was my office mate and closest friend. And then we got P.D. James over there, and Harry Patterson, who wrote under the name Jack Hawkins, 4 major big hitters, and Tabitha King, who was in her own right an excellent novelist and still is. And so we had spent 2 weeks together in London, and he was just great. So over the years we exchanged emails and Christmas cards and all that. I mean, I haven't been in contact with him for maybe 20 years, but I've been teaching his books in my courses. So I'm still close to him on the written page, in the sense. I'm supposed to say, choose me, the next one that's coming out, which is, I love the book. But I think what is dear to my heart is probably the first one I wrote under the pen name Gary Braver. It's Elixir, about the anti-aging drug. Because it brings in many things. I had spent some time in Papua New Guinea, where there were representatives from Eli Lilly and Pfizer and other Western world pharmaceutical companies who were giving seashells to tribal shaman for them to tell them which plants healed and which plants killed, because there were so many medicines that come from the trees, like digitalis and quinine, and they were looking for miracle drugs growing on trees, and that gave me the idea for Elixir. So, having had a personal thing there, and also I had young children at the time, and there were a couple of kids in the book, so it was I was drawing from my own experiences. And from what was around me, my children growing up around me, and there was a kid or two in the book. So that's dear to my heart. And the next one, Gray Matter, is also, because that has children in it, trying to boost the intelligence of kids. And because as a teacher, I know kids who had learning disabilities, that warmed my heart somewhat as a motive to write about kids who aren't brilliant but have so much more going for them, have a kind of emotional intelligence, an athletic intelligence, a musical intelligence, not just a mathematical intelligence. So those 2 books, Elixir and Gray Matter, are my 2 favorites, my 2 favorite kids. The review that makes my heart leap is, this is a good story, well written. The well written part, when they say it's well crafted, well written, great turn of phrase, intoxicating style, that makes my heart aflutter. The stories, I can make up stories. I can take the reader places they've never been before, I think, and give them something interesting to spend a few hours with. But I spent a lot of time on my phraseology. I avoid adverbs as much as I can. I rather show than tell, and I use language that I hope is not trite, that is a clever way of saying something. And I work very hard at that. That takes a lot of time. The greatest pleasure in the process of writing a book is when the manuscript is done and I go through it, give it a final sweep, and tweak the wording so that it just hums. It does what I want it to do. And that, whatever talent that is, comes from having studied other people's writing. And I said earlier that one way to learn how to write is teach someone else's book. Teach the books you wish you had written, and study them. Look at them the way a carpenter looks at a house. Look at the angles. Look at the way the author gets in and out of a scene. As I said earlier, look at this patch, this strip of dialogue, 7 or 8 inches long on a page, and look how the distinction of characters is there. And that is, if I can do that on my own, then I've accomplished something a lot more than what many reviewers would find satisfactory. And it's really the style is, I can't define my style. I don't know if style can really be defined clearly or succinctly. But what I spend a lot of time is les mots justes, the right words in the right places and with the greatest impact. One of the great writers of all time and influential in writing is Edgar Allan Poe. I had a beer with Stephen King, and he said, all the writers he knows have indebtedness to Edgar Allan Poe, because what Poe said, and he wrote this in an essay called The Philosophy of Composition. Know the ending of your story first, and line up all your ducks so that that what happens at the end has been prepared for, and have that be a shocker, have a maximum effect, and that is true for writing a short story. It is true for writing chapters. It is true for writing the whole novel. And make sure the language is germane to the story and thematically and poetically, lyrically satisfying. And that's a guide that's been with me all the time. You mentioned Stephen King. One of the reasons that I adopted his books early on is I have read The Dead Zone way back in the late 70s. And I said, not only does this guy has a dynamite story idea, but the writing is really polished. And the psychological layering of the characters is very impressive. So, and it is not just plot driven, they're character driven. And the language is evocative. It's provocative. You can feel it. And that is what has attracted me to so many writers: Daphne du Maurier, Margaret Atwood, The Handmaid's Tale, Dean Koontz, and Ken Kesey, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. What a fabulous stylist that man was. This is what has been a pleasure in teaching is making my students aware of really good writing, even though these are in popular genres. Elixir was, and Atlantis, the very first one, Atlantis Fire was, Elixir was optioned 3 or 4 times, but the first one was by Ridley Scott, the director, and that is because of that I had gone on writing under the pen name Gary Braver, because it was to be a very big book with a possibly very big movie attached to it. He optioned it for 2 years straight, and then passed and he made Hannibal instead, the follow-up to Silence of the Lambs. and Sour Grapes. It was a lousy movie. But because it was to be a big book, the publisher said, "We're going to want you to change your name so that the sales will not be, the print run will not be based on the print run of your previous books." On the Goshgarian, if 10,000 copies are made and it sold 7,000, they're only going to print up 7,000 of the next book. And so they printed up a lot more than that, but I had to change my name, which is fine. And
if you are interested in Gary Goshgarian's imagined future scientific or technological advances, be sure to read one of his many best-selling books, including Elixir, Gray Matter, and Skin Deep. And remember that such books help us understand the future and think and wonder about our present.